I'm so glad to be giving this talk tonight in honor of Bev. As Kathy said, my name is Carole Starr, and Bev and I did found Brain Injury Voices together a little bit more than 4 years ago now. And as a group, it's so been our honor and privilege to put together this workshop to share her wisdom with all of you tonight. Now, the short talk that I'm about to give has nothing to do with Bev Bryant and everything to do with Bev Bryant, both at the same time. Nothing to do with her because the story that I'm going to tell you, she's not in that story at all. It has everything to do with Bev Bryant because of what I'm doing and the way that I'm doing it. As many of you know, Bev was my mentor. She was also my dear friend. She really encouraged me to develop as a brain injury speaker. She knew long before I did that I was going to give keynote speeches. I actually didn't believe her when she told me that I was going to give keynote speeches someday. I said, oh, no, that's beyond me. She said, yes, you will, and I'm going to be in the audience. And 5 years ago, that was indeed true. One thing that she was always encouraging me to do was to put more humor into my speeches. She said, tell a joke now and then, Carole. Don't be so serious. So tonight, as part of my tribute to her, I'm going to do just that. I'm going to tell you a funny story, and then talk about what some of the lessons are from it in terms of living with brain injury. So that's the first part of my tribute to her. The second part of my tribute to her has to do with her influence on me as I developed as a brain injury speaker. I still remember the first time that I saw her talk when my own injury was just a year or two old. I looked at her and I said, I want to do that someday. When I first started out giving presentations, I had to have literally every single word written out. Do not deviate from the script. I was scared to even deviate one letter, one word away from what I had written down. But Bev encouraged me over the last decade, really, to develop my voice, to trust what I have to say, to move towards going, quote, off book. And so she encouraged me, as well as all of us with brain injuries, to really expand our horizons, to push beyond our boundaries, challenge ourselves, to aim high and go after our dreams. My own dream is to someday be a national brain injury speaker, just like she was. So today, I'm going to take another step towards that. For the very first time tonight, I'm going to step away from the podium to give at least part of this speech. This is something that I have never done, so I'm in uncharted territory. So Bev, this one is for you. So the title of my talk is Weasilience. You might have looked at that on the agenda and said, what kind of made-up word is that? It is a play on the word resilience. And trust me, in about a minute or two, you will understand why it is titled Weasilience. And you too will be able to pronounce that particular word that I made up. So the story that I'm about to tell you, this is a true story. Every single thing happened. This happened about 7 or 8 years ago. It was early March, 4 o'clock in the morning. I woke up and I heard this kind of scratching noise. And I thought sleepily, oh, there must be some kind of an animal outside of my window. But then I kind of continued to wake up, and I had the horrifying realization that that wasn't outside, that was inside. There was something running around underneath my bed. So in a panic, I reached for the light. As the light floods the room, I see something dash out of my bedroom. I jump out of bed, close the door, jump back into bed, pull the covers up around my neck, and sat there shaking for a little while. What in the world had gotten into my house? I had no idea. And I didn't know really what to do. It was 4 o'clock in the morning, much too early to call anybody. I could hear the thing. It was in the next room now. I also realized that I couldn't call anybody because it was in the room where the phone was. So eventually I realized, all right, I gotta get out of bed. I need to find out what is in my house. So turning on every light as I went into my office, and there I saw this little thing. I'm going to show you what it looked like. This speech comes with props. It kind of looked a little bit like this. It was completely white, It had a black tip on its tail. It was maybe a little bit longer than this. And it was running back and forth along the back wall of my office. I had no idea what this was or how in the world it had gotten into my house. And as sometimes happens when I don't know what to do, I kind of froze. So I just sat there and I stared at the thing for like 2 hours. I did pull up a chair eventually and I stared at this thing. I wasn't afraid of it because it seemed kind of friendly. As I was watching it, sitting in my chair, it would come to maybe within about a foot of me. I noticed that it kind of liked my gift wrap tubes, which I had stored underneath my spare bed in my office. It would go in and out of those and peek out at me. And as I watched it, I thought, I think this is a ferret. I think somebody's pet ferret got into my house. I'd never seen a ferret before, but I'd seen pictures of them. This kind of looked like that. And I remembered that the day before, there'd been a big snowstorm. I had been outside shoveling snow, and my storm door got left open. So I thought, that must have been how it got in. Now, the improbability of somebody, one of my neighbors being outside walking their pet ferret in the middle of a snowstorm did not occur to me at that moment. But somehow I felt a little bit more comforted to think that, okay, this was somebody's pet that had gotten into my house. So 6 o'clock comes, and I called my parents. And they said, you need to call animal control. But in the meantime, you got to eat something, you got to get ready for the day. So I shut the door to my office, trapping my little friend in there. I took a shower, had breakfast, got ready. As soon as the town office opened, I called them. They were able to come right away. I was the first call of the day. So animal control man arrives. We open the door to my office. My furry little friend is no longer there. Apparently he could go underneath the door. So we searched my house for this thing. I did find him again. He was back in the bedroom, on my bed, behind my pillow, looking out at us. I did a lot of laundry later on that day. Animal control man took one look at that and said, ma'am, that's not a ferret, that's a wild weasel. Hence the title of my speech, Weasilience. I think I went a little weak in the knees when I realized I'd spent the early morning hours communing with a wild weasel. And so, by all rights, he could have left at that point, because animal control's job is domesticated animals, not wild animals. But he was nice. He said, well, let me see if I can help you catch this thing. So we chased this weasel through my house, could not catch it. Eventually, it went into the kitchen, and apparently, between the baseboard and the cupboard, there's a little space. In went the weasel. At that point, animal control man's radio crackled. He had to leave. He had another call. At that point, I lost it, just cried. He kind of took pity on me. He told me he would call somebody that he knew who specialized in wild animal trapping. And at that moment, I don't know quite how or why, but I remembered the 2 hours I had spent with my furry friend watching it in my office. I remembered that it liked my gift wrap tubes. And so I said, can we set a trap for this thing? So we got a gift wrap tube, and we duct taped the end. And we put this thing in the corner, and then where the weasel had gone in, hoping that there was only one way out of this particular corner. So then animal control man left. I pulled up a chair. I stared at that corner and cried for about an hour. But eventually, my little weasel friend did indeed come out. He went right into the tube, just as I hoped he would. And then, I don't know if this was bravery or stupidity, but I grabbed the tube, and I ran through my house with a tube of weasel. And then I rushed to the front door, and I launched the tube right out the front door onto a snowbank. And then I watched as my little weasel eventually exited the tube and went bouncing across a snowbank. Now that I think of it, I probably gave my weasel a brain injury. Later on that day, the animal trapper that animal control man had called did call me, and I told him how I had caught this thing. He had a very thick Maine accent, and he said, well now, aren't you a good little trapper? So that's my story. So now you might be thinking, all right, yeah, Carole, that was funny, but what in the world does that have to do with living with brain injury? Well, I have 3 points to share about that. And this is the serious part, so now I'm going back to the podium. The points that I want to make from this story that I think have a lot to do with living with brain injury, and ultimately, these are points that Bev taught me through the example of her life with brain injury. And they are about denial, observation, and learning. The first one is overcoming denial. Now, in my weasel adventure, eventually, I had to overcome my fear, get out of bed, and figure out what was running around in my house. That was the only way I was going to deal with it, was to confront it, to face it. When something bad happens to us, be it a weasel, be it a brain injury, I think our first response is often denial, because reality is just so hard to face. When something bad happens, we desperately want to go back to our previous life, to our weasel-free life, our brain injury-free life. I know after my own brain injury, all I could think about was getting back to normal, to the way life used to be. I spent many, many years just pounding myself against the closed door of how life used to be. I think there comes a time in the recovery process when we have to realize that we can't look back anymore, that our old lives have indeed ended after our brain injuries, and that we are new people, that we have to accept what is. When we can let go of that denial, it's a very powerful moment, because that is when we switch our focus from looking backwards to looking forward. At least in my own experience and the experiences I know from a lot of other people, that is when real progress begins to start, when that switch happens. So that's point number 1 from my weasel story, about overcoming denial. Point number 2 from my weasel story has to do with observation. Now, I caught my furry little friend because I had observed that it liked my gift wrap tubes. There is no way on earth I ever would have thought of thinking of that particular trap for the thing if I had not spent those 2 hours staring at it. I think that self-observation is also a critical skill for all of us living with brain injury. It was Socrates, among others, who said, "Know thyself." As survivors, we have to get to know these new selves that we are now after brain injury, what our symptoms are, how we react to things, what limitations we have now, what strategies we can use to make life work, what our strengths are. I think that part of what makes those first few years after brain injury so horribly bewildering is that we don't know ourselves anymore, because so much has changed and become just unpredictable. It's kind of like we've been trying to play a new game with the old rule book, which of course doesn't work. It takes a lot of trial and error to figure out who we are now. But I think observation is key, and the more that we can observe and get to know these new people that we are now, the more successful we can be at living with brain injury. So that's point 2, observing our symptoms. And my third point from my weasel story has to do with learning. I'm a huge believer in trying to learn from challenging events, like weasels, like brain injury. Yeah, having a weasel in my house kind of sucked. Having a brain injury sucks a heck of a lot more. But when I can figure out what a challenge has to teach me, somehow that makes stuff suck just a little bit less. Now, I can choose to ask myself the question, why me? But there really isn't any answer to that question. Or I can choose to ask myself, what can I learn from this situation? What does this situation have to teach me? And there is always learning to be found. So now you might be thinking, all right, Carole, what did that weasel have to teach you? Well, both my experience with the weasel as well as with brain injury have taught me a great deal about resilience, that I am stronger than I know. Now, how I handle things might not always be pretty. It might take me a long time to figure things out. I might cry a lot. I might get confused. I might have to spend hours or days on my couch recovering after something. But I know that I will find my way. A minute ago, I quoted great philosopher Socrates. Now I'm going to quote another great philosopher, Winnie the Pooh. He's got some good words that also apply to my situation with the weasel, as well as all of us with brain injuries. You are braver than you believe, stronger than you seem, and smarter than you think. So those are my 3 lessons from my funny story in honor of Bev, about overcoming denial, about observing one's symptoms, and choosing to learn from the situation. To close my part of this program, I looked to Bev for inspiration again. As many of you know, she wrote lots of poems. Many of them are in her books. So as one more nod to Bev and the tremendous inspiration she has been to me, I thought I'd end my talk today with my own little poem, something to pull together everything that I just said. So here it is. I'll do this one away from the podium too. When life throws you weasels, what do? First instinct is to hide, because you don't have a clue. Emerge from denial. Look it square in the face. And I forgot the rest. I knew that was going to happen at some point. Emerge from denial. Look it square in the face. That's when you turn forward and really start the race. Strategies are possible if you observe with care. Help can be found when you look everywhere. So learn from this moment, and you'll manage with brilliance. Then you too can proudly say, I have Weasilience.